Good morning, everyone. And welcome to Star King Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. My name is Paul Phillips. I'm a member here, and I'm serving today as your worship associate. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today. This is one of our, this is the third in a series of our summer services. The theme of our summer services this year is Cultivating Love, and all of these services are lay-led. Our regular minister, Reverend Linda Barnes, will return to the pulpit on Sunday, September 14th.
It's going to be the 7th.
The 7th?
I think so.
Oh, it's been changed, all right. September 7th. That's right, because Labor Day falls as early as it can this year on the 1st of September. So we'll be back here on September 7th with regular services. We're so pleased to have Dr. Maria Sanders with us here today to discuss exploring happiness as a community. Before we get started, I do have a couple of announcements, because what would Star King services be without announcements? The first is that this service is being live streamed by Penny Baker TV. Thank you so much for that. The second is this talk today is sponsored by New Hampshire Hu-manities as part of their Humanities to Go program. And they have asked us, and so we will ask you, to complete a survey about today's talk, which will help them with their future programming. So it's customary in our fellowship to open our service with a chalice lighting. Our chalice is the sign that we are in a sacred space. The flaming chalice represents our shared hope, our collective quest for truth and justice, the warmth of our community, and the light of reason. So it's particularly appropriate for our discussion today. Our chalice lighting words are by David Brennan. We light this chalice, remembering and honoring our own tradition and celebrating the rich diversity of traditions among us. As we search for justice, meaning, and purpose, may we remember that justice, meaning, and purpose live first in deeply listening to one another. So Dr. Maria Sanders is our speaker today. She is a philosophy professor at Plymouth State University and the author of Mind the Gap. There was a copy of that. We hold it up, I'm sure. Here it is. Mind the Gap, Exploring Happiness as a Community. She holds advanced degrees in philosophy, law, business, and music. She's a public philosopher who has received multiple teaching and service awards. She has facilitated town-wide happiness quests and hosted local radio and television programs designed to encourage reflective discussions, exploring connections to local communities, and researching variables for living full and flourishing lives. A common theme found throughout her work is the importance of the relationship between human beings and the natural world, emphasizing the impact meaningful places have on individuals and their communities. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Sanders.
Thank you. So I'm usually a pacer and wanderer, so I'll see. It feels like I'm looking over top here. I might use that mic instead. I also have a very loud voice, but all right. Can you hear me? Yeah. No, it's showing green. Oh, am I too close?
You can't be too close.
Testing. There we go. All right, well, I would like to thank the fellowship and Kathy for hosting this, Paul for making sure everything runs smoothly right from the start. We already have some tech stuff that we're trying to put into work. And the New Hampshire Humanities for sponsoring it. This is a talk, I always revise them for each of the groups, what I think would be kind of most interesting, because there's a whole lot of research out there on happiness, and my talk is very research-based. So it's a little different each time this talk is given, but it is a talk that's part of the New Hampshire Humanities to Go program. And because of some of the recent cuts at the federal level, we are asking everyone to keep them in mind, check out their website in that the humanities state groups across the country are having a little more difficult time putting a lot of these programs on because they've lost a lot of their funding. So fortunately, New Hampshire Humanities has some outside funding and such that they're continuing to move forward with a lot of these programs. But I'm very grateful with their willingness to continue sponsoring programs like this one. And most of all, thank you guys for coming here. I know you have choices on how you could spend your Sunday morning, and so I'm really pleased that you decided to spend an hour of it with me this morning. As Paul mentioned, I'm a applied ethics philosopher, a public philosopher, so a lot of my work is out here in the community. This is an especially special morning for me because I recognize so many faces out here. I spent a lot of time in Plymouth, working at Plymouth State. I used to live in Plymouth. I'm over in Warren now. But my primary area of research is a concept called eudaimonia. And we don't really have an English word for it, so it often gets translated as happiness. But we're going to talk today about how eudaimonia is different than, especially in the United States, our understanding of happiness. It overlaps with it, but in my opinion, it goes beyond how we think of happiness. So with that, let's go ahead and dive on in. So it's probably pretty obvious there are benefits to happiness. This is one of the areas that researchers have looked at. In particular, three primary areas, a lot of research has started to emerge on how happy people tend to be benefiting over unhappy people. Within places of employment, we find happy individuals tend to land the interview more readily. They tend to, during the interviews, do well, land the job. When they're on the job or at their places of employment, happy employees tend to be more productive. Now that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. It's attractive business communities. So now happiness marketing, #1 marketing technique, and it's a bit of a mixed bag, whether as the consumers we result in happiness long-term out of that happiness marketing. Also, there's a big push out of the business community to not only understand the happiness research, which is a positive thing, but sometimes to rush to results. It's what in a scientific context we think of the more fluffy research out there. It hasn't really followed all of the standards or more opinion-based. So you have to really be careful if you just go online and do like a Google search. Again, there's a mixed bag out there of how reliable some of these results are. And what you're going to find me continue to come back around to when I talk about the various studies, treat these variables as trends. In other words, what makes one person happy might make you miserable. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that there's not a single one-size-fits-all when it comes to happiness. And I always tell people, if someone's trying to sell you a book that says, here's the answer, be a little cautious of that, because there isn't a magic pill. If there was, we'd all be taking it, we'd be done. You know, the fact that we've been talking about this since really the ancient Greek days in Western civilization means it's not quite a simple fix. So when it comes to the research, again, I just say always go back and look at the source and where that's coming from. But there does seem to be pretty well-established research around the productivity of happy employees. Happy employees tend to be more productive employees. In a capitalistic country like ours, that's a positive thing. Likewise, happy employees tend to be promoted more readily. They tend to, as managerial positions or in positions of supervisory settings, they tend to do well. They're usually evaluated higher by their employees or the people reporting to them than unhappy managers are. And none of this is particularly surprising. I mean, if you think about it, just like the old adage, misery loves company, happiness is contagious too. So we like to be around happy people. But where the research is looking in this fashion is it does seem to directly correlate in some fashions to our places of employment. Kind of an important thing in the United States since we spend so much time in our careers. In fact, a lot of us, when we're introducing ourselves, we lead with our careers. That doesn't happen in other areas of the world. So our identity is largely wrapped up in this work environment. So if we want to be happy, we've got to pay attention to that research around employment and work. Social success. Again, we find happy people tend to have more meaningful friendships and relationships. Doesn't necessarily mean the quantity is higher. So we'll talk a little bit about the difference between quantity and quality when it comes to friendships. It's been a little distorted now with a lot of our technology and social media platforms. We're finding some of that is actually having a negative outcome. Again, I'm not going to do a deep dive today unless you have particular interest on the digital technology side, because that's an entire another track we could go down. But it is worth mentioning that digital technologies, they're here to stay, and it is having an impact. It's not all negative. The research so far has been, in my opinion, a little bit unbalanced, where they've pointed out a lot of the negative side of digital technologies. And I don't want to make light of that because there's some pretty severe stuff that's happening on the negative side. But there is positive stuff that's coming out of our technologies too. Again, want to welcome Penny Baker TV, who's live streaming this for us. That's one of the positive aspects that's coming out of technology. This is something that couldn't happen, 20 years ago. The connections, I have 4 children. I have one that lives in New Hampshire, although I'm heading down to pick my second one up from Texas. Right after this talk, he's moving back to New Hampshire, so I'll have 2 in New Hampshire. But my other 2, that's how I stay connected with them. The digital technologies permit that. So this social aspect of it is something we need to do a much deeper dive into from a scientific research standpoint, now that things are changing so rapidly with the digital technologies. And AI and generative AI programs are adding to this as well. And I think, again, it'll be a mixed bag. It won't all be negative, even though we tend, because of our film industry, we tend to lead that way initially in the United States. And then finally, health benefits. Long story short, we find happy people are living longer. I mean, that's good news. And the lives that they are living longer seem to be lives that are more meaningful because they are happy. So it has a bit of a reciprocity to it. And several of the variables, as I drill down into the research, you're going to find that reciprocity. And what I mean by reciprocity is, I'll use the example of like setting goals. We find people who set goals and then achieve those goals tend to have higher levels of happiness when they report their happiness levels. But we also find people who achieve goals tend to be happier people. So this kind of this ping pong effect, that's what I mean by reciprocity, is often the variable that they're identifying as increasing your happiness is an easier thing to do if you're already happy. So it goes back and forth, which is good news that once you get on that treadmill, so to speak, it gets easier and easier because it has this reciprocity of sorts. All right, so what is happiness? I mean, I have been talking about the benefits of it. I hinted a little bit when I used that term eudaimonia that there's different definitions to happiness. But it's very important. This is a step that I feel is often skipped when researchers talk about not just happiness, but any sort of research. Whatever the subject matter is that we're studying, we need to be really careful we're all on the same page as to what it is we're talking about. And I'll be the first one to admit, I don't think that's always happening amongst the happiness research. The researchers, I think, have clear ideas of what they're talking about, not when it gets reported out. That quite often they take little tidbits, little conclusions out of context, and that's what you hear through the media sites. And by the time it's being reported, it can be overstated or understated, the impact of that variable. So when we think about happiness, again, I've been studying this, I'm going to date myself here, but about 4 decades now, so nearly 40 years. And there are a lot of definitions out there. I'm a philosopher, but most of the research I'm going to share with you today is coming out of the field of psychology, positive psychology in particular. But as I mentioned before, the business community is interested in this, marketing obviously, the anthropologists, the historians are interested in this. When we look at societies, what constitutes a happy community, a happy society, a resilient society. And then biologists are interested in this. Your neuroscientists are interested. What's going on in your brain, okay, when you're happy versus when you're unhappy? Geneticists are interested in it. That's the area I'm the least interested in and most concerned about. I'm not into genetic manipulation to be happy, but there's a thriving area of study around, can we identify certain genes or certain predispositions that exist in happiness. So I share that with you because this is not one of those topics that lives within one discipline. It's very disciplined, and because of that, the understanding of what it actually means is going to be varied, because we talk a slightly different talk in academia, depending upon what discipline you come out of. So when I looked at all these, and there were literally hundreds of different definitions that researchers were beginning their studies with. Here's what we mean by happiness. But when I took a couple steps back and really looked at all these definitions, what I realized is they were really fitting in one of three categories. Most of them within the United States, and even globally speaking, were in one of the first two categories. So in other words, if I were to just walk up to you and say, are you happy? Your mind has already formulated a definition for happiness in order for you to understand that question. So what we find is for most people, that definition that's automatically been formulated is either, she's asking me how I feel right now, so happiness is a feeling, yeah, it's going pretty good, I'm pretty happy. Or she's asking me how I feel about my life. You know, am I content with my life? Am I satisfied with my life? That's a much broader understanding of the concept of happiness. Because if you think about happiness as a feeling, feelings are very temporary, they're in the now. We feel in the present. We can pull feelings back from the past, your memories can incite a new feeling, but you're still feeling it now. So we feel now. And so if we pursue happiness as a feeling and nothing else, that's our sole definition for happiness, it's a bit of a recipe for disaster. And when you hear statements like, you can't buy happiness, usually it's because they're defining happiness as a feeling. You know, that, okay, if I want to feel a certain way, and let's say I get that feeling when I buy a new car. Think about the first vehicle that you ever had. I think that makes us happy even if it's a clunker. We're happy with that first vehicle. But we're happy with it not because of necessarily the car. It's what it brings for us. You know, it brings this mobility, this freedom. It's a stage in life. If I buy that same car 20 more times, I'm not going to maintain that same feeling. In fact, you may never feel that again with a car purchase compared to your first one. So happiness is a feeling. It can actually lead us down the road of treating happiness almost like an addiction. It can become addictive. I need more and more and more just to feel the same thing. So the happiness as a feeling has this diminishing returns. So if you have someone who, let's say, is chasing that dollar sign because they want the bigger house, they want the better car, they want to go on the better vacations or the larger reputation, that how others are seeing them, they're on that cycle, that dangerous addictive cycle of really trying to just grasp happiness through stuff and through things. But having said that, the relationship between money and happiness is very complex. There are a small handful of people that do get happiness from money itself. We call them misers. You know, they're the rare exception. For most of us, if we're thinking about money as being positive, it's a tool, right? It's because of what it can do for us. It's what it can buy or the freedom it allots, but it's not the money itself. If it's the money itself, you would never let go of it. You're just stacking it up at home. Okay, that's why I say it's the miser. But there is a qualitative side when we think about the relationship between money and happiness. And this is where it's really interesting. We'll get a little later this morning into the comparisons between countries and which is the happiest country and how they determine that. And a lot of the reason that we're surprised when we see which countries rank high and which countries rank low is because we think of it through this consumeristic lens. And that's not really what drives happiness, even when it comes to money. What drives it really is when we're buying experiences. So what they find is there is a correlation between happiness and money that's quantitative. In fact, they have roughly put a dollar amount on it for the United States. Now it's going to vary depending on where you live, depending on your own personal preferences. But if you think of it this way, if this hand is actually how happy you are, and my front hand is how much money you make, you're going to have a direct correlation up to what they claim to be about $75,000 to $80,000 a year. It's going to look like this. So I'm making $40,000 a year, I'm this happy. I suddenly make $50,000, this happy. $70,000, this happy. But something happens if I go from, let's say, $75,000 to $85,000, $95,000. This is still going up, this is starting to plateau. I'm not getting that same return, for that increase in number. But again, that's going back to what we said, it becomes almost addictive of sorts. Now, again, your number may be very different. You may only need 30 or 40,000. You may need 150, 200,000. But we all have a number, is what the research is saying. Now, that's the quantitative side. The qualitative side, we need very little money if we're using our money in certain ways, if we're using it to purchase experiences. So here's the difference. Let's say I buy a kayak. It's the best kayak I can find on the market, and I hang it on the side of my cabin because I want my neighbor to see I got a better kayak than they have. I guess that's sort of an experience, but not really. That's buying stuff. Okay, I'm comparing stuff there. I'm not really using the kayak. Now, if instead I buy that exact same kayak, and every weekend I either go out on my own on lakes, because I like that serenity, or as I did what got me into kayaking when I moved to New Hampshire, there was a group of wonderful ladies that formed a kayak club, and every week we would just go to a different pond, a different lake, and go kayaking. So that has a whole lot wrapped up in it. You've got these social connections. You have an experience that's very rich. Same amount of money spent, okay, on both of those. So what they're looking at when they look at money is how we spend our money matters. If we're buying stuff, you're probably going to need more money to get that same feeling of happiness. And at some point, it's a recipe for disaster. It's going to end up plateauing out. So it's never going to work for anyone to infinity. Like, you're going to have a point that it starts to plateau. But if you're very consciously and intentionally buying experiences, you don't need nearly as much money, and it has a much larger return when it comes to happiness. And we'll see that again as we start looking at the countries. But again, this is all thinking of happiness as pleasure, happiness as a feeling. Happiness as contentment or life satisfaction. Sometimes they even use different words here because they don't want the two confused. I've heard them refer to this as joy or bliss. Again, it doesn't matter what terminology they're using. The understanding behind it is you're satisfied with your life. So it's not just about this moment. It's about everything leading up to this moment and what you anticipate is coming down the road, but it's basically the past and the present. So let's use this example. Let's say you pull onto the parking lot here this morning for the service, and I back into your car. You get a fender bender. Like, oh, great. What did that do to your happiness as pleasure? There you go. Well stated. Yeah, it's going to nosedive, right? Because that's in the moment. It's right now. I'm not feeling great about this. What about happiness as contentment? Do you suddenly say, my life is awful?
It's just a car.
It's just a car. It's this one little instant. So notice what happens as soon as we broaden that lens and we take in the past and the present, it's a moment. Where in happiness as pleasure, the moment is everything. So it becomes more devastating in my mindset, when I'm focused just on that moment. So in that way, increasingly, more and more researchers are interested in happiness as contentment because it has this greater possibility for long-term happiness. Now, I'm interested in both of these, but my primary focus, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, is eudaimonia. Now, this word is a Greek word. Eu means good. Daimonia, daimon is spirit. So literally translated, it means good luck or good spirit. And it basically, if you go back to the early ancient Greek philosophers, and here I'm going before probably the ones most people are familiar with, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, before those guys, when they thought of eudaimonia, they tended to think of it as a matter of luck. Like if you were happy, that was just your good luck. You were born in the right place, good things happened to you, and you were just the recipient of it. And if you happen to be born in a place that was going to make you miserable, okay, because again, the external events is what's driving your happiness, that was bad luck, dysdaimonia. So it was all good luck, bad luck. When Aristotle came on the scene, and again, this is around 300 BCE time period, he took another look at this. He didn't dismiss what the earlier Greeks were saying, and he acknowledged, yes, what happens to us, those what I'm calling external events, the stuff that happens, the fender bender that you had no control over, that impacts us. But how much does it impact us? Does it really drive your final happiness like these earlier groups were thinking? And Aristotle started questioning that, and he said, no, I don't think that's the case. It seems like it's more complex than that, because two people can have a fender bender and they're not reacting the same way. So what's different here? And what he started looking at, and this is really our concept of eudaimonia now, is this idea of living a full and flourishing life is a life that's lived according to principles or guidelines. Now, I agree with a lot of what Aristotle said. I disagree with him on the point he felt there was a magic pill, so to speak, a one-size formula that fits everybody. Again, after 4 decades of looking at this, I just don't think that's true. If you look at the results of what's making people happy, sometimes it's directly opposite things that are making them happy. But he felt there was one set of guidelines that you could just use for everyone. And he outlines those in his Nicomachean Ethics. Nicomachean Ethics, little side note here, was never intended to be published. It was basically, it's named after, we're not sure if it was his father or his son, because they were both called Nicomachus. But his students pulled together all of his notes from when he was teaching his ethics classes back in the day, and then published this as Nicomachean Ethics. So if you read the Nicomachean Ethics alongside of all of other Aristotle's works, it feels much less organized. It's a little more interesting, in my opinion. A lot of his stuff reads like a scientific report would read, like his metaphysics and that, because he had a very scientific mind to him. In fact, marine biology was really one of his deep passions. But the Nicomachean Ethics, a little bit all over the place. It's not quite as organized. There's repetition in it. It's a little redundant. It's because he didn't put that together and put it out to be published. And I always cringe as a faculty member to think my students would pull things I said in class together and publish a book under my name. Like, ugh. Because I look at their notes different times, like, I know I never said this. You know, we need to change that. So that's what happened with the Nicomachean Ethics. But what he does, at least attempt to do in the Nicomachean Ethics, is give us that list of what he calls virtues, the character traits. Those are his guidelines, okay, that are guiding happiness for him. The ultimate goal is really to be happy. And again, what happiness means, to live fully and flourishing, okay, that we have this full life. Now again, I can pick apart his list. Most of it we probably would still agree with today, some of it we would not. One example that I think was a little bit culturally driven is, to use some of our own English words today, he actually put as a virtue to be boastful, like to brag about yourself. We wouldn't view that as a virtue today, except in what context? When are you supposed to boast about yourself? What's that? Politics. And it can backfire in politics too.
About his children.
Job interviews, the big one, right? And it's why so many people are horrible at it, especially in the United States, is because you spend all this time saying, don't be boastful, be humble, you know, let somebody else sing your praises, and then suddenly we put you in front of this person that could hire you and go, okay, tell them everything great about yourself. It feels awkward, you know, but again, in Aristotle's day, what he had in mind is a lot of times it was they were coming back from war. You know, they're boasting about their military conquers. Again, there's an elitism already built into a lot of this. You know, so it's kind of like when you look back at our founding days when we talk about everybody, it really wasn't everybody. And that was true back in the ancient Greek period too. When he's writing to everyone, it's not really everyone that he's writing to. So when you kind of drill down to, well, then what in practice are we talking about? It makes a little more sense that he's talking about more of these like military conquests, and he's referring to their warriors as they're coming back. But I do think there's some really valuable in this concept that got flushed out from Aristotle on. And it's this idea that if I pursue happiness as living a full and flourishing life, that's the past, the present, the future, all wrapped up together. That is a full life. You can't sit in the rocking chair on your front porch and only think about the past to have Hu-manic happiness. That's part of it. We definitely want to remember those happy memories. We want to learn from perhaps the unhappy ones. But you have to be looking forward. You have to be thinking about what's that next thing I'm going to try. What am I doing next? We have to keep living. I always explain to my students in the context of thinking of life as a verb rather than a noun. That with Hu-manic happiness, it's a verb. It's an action that you're taking. It's a behavior. That's what life becomes. All right, some of you may be familiar with this. This is back in 2015. I moved to Plymouth it was the second half of 2013. So I'd only been in the area about a year and a half. And I organized a town-wide happiness quest. Did anyone in here participate in the happiness quest? You have a couple of heads nodding. All right, this was fun if nothing else. What we did is we didn't include minors, so anyone under the age of 18 in the actual research, but they could participate in all the events. Okay? But in the actual research component of this, I worked with 3 other faculty members on campus, a gentleman in sustainability, a lady from psychology, and a gentleman from anthropology. And we created a survey tool that we gave to everyone at the beginning. When I say the beginning of our year, it was actually in September that we started this. So we ran it fall to the beginning of the next fall. So anyone who wanted to participate in the research side filled out this survey, and then they filled out the exact same survey at the end of the year. And we were comparing the results. Now, the question I was interested in was, if an entire town focuses on happiness, will it matter how they participate in the context of raising their happiness or lowering their happiness? In other words, I knew connecting with a community increases our happiness. There are many studies that have already said that. What I was interested in, does it matter if you're the one that came up with the idea that now is the event that's occurring, you're volunteering at the event, or you're participating, you're just showing up? Are those the different ways we connect, are those going to be relevant variables in our level of happiness? So what the happiness quest was is some individuals filled out this survey. Everyone who wanted to participate then, we had 6 to 8 activities monthly. Some of those activities changed each month. Some of them were consistent. Some of the consistent ones, there was an art walk, the Wednesday walkabouts. That was part of the happiness quest where that kick-started. The businesses put up local artists' work, and every Wednesday evening during designated times, we'd have just groups walking around to look at this, and some of the businesses would offer free samples, and it created this little inner community that was happening. We had group hikes, group picnics, group ice skates over at the arena. There were pottery events, different kinds of art events. A lot of the PSU faculty got involved where they led different events that and everything was free and open to the public. One of the challenges we ran into was defining the community. Because Plymouth is a little difficult in that phrase. You've got the individuals who maybe spend a lot of time in Plymouth but don't actually live in Plymouth. That's me. You've got the local residents that live here. This is home for them. Then you have the college community, so students that may be here anywhere from 6 months to 10 months, but they're not here the full year. And they're in like almost a once removed community as well, being on the college campus. Then you've got the people who work here but don't live here, people who go to school here. You've got a regional high school but don't live here. And then you have the tourists. So in the winter, that's a very different tourist group than the summer tourist group. So is it the ski group that's kind of on their way through, they're passing through a lot more, people with second homes, or is it the lake community or the hikers that are coming up here because of the beautiful nature that we have? So all of these are communities, and when we're saying Plymouth, in certain ways they all identify with being Plymouth. So one thing, in full disclosure, that I feel like I did incorrectly in setting up the research side of it is I tried to be inclusive and include everybody, which was great for the activities and the events, screwed up the research because we had a hard time identifying the community. So starting this year, we're doing smaller, more segmented communities. And if you have an interest, if you have an organization that you'd like to do one of these happiness quests, come see me. Because I'm taking down the sign-up lists and that. I've got about one more month. There's way more groups that want to do happiness quests than I'll be able to actually physically do. But I have room in Plymouth yet. So if you've got a few, or if you have even a book club, a club that you belong to, an association, or your place of employment, those are all sub-communities that we're going to be looking at. Okay? So with the happiness quest, one real positive thing that did come out of it, and I talked about this a little bit, the differences in communities, but one positive thing that did come out of it is this book. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how this formula I call the GAP. So mind the GAP is actually an acronym, that really came out of the Plymouth Happiness Quest and what we learned from that. These are just some examples of different communities that can be geographically based, which is what we were starting with Plymouth. Interest-based, which is where a lot of my focus is moving forward this year, is it's groups that are formulated around a certain interest that they have. Or virtual groups, and again, a lot of what that technical, digital technology is impacting things. Why the focus on community? We see a lot of direct correlation between community and happiness. There's the social support and emotional well-being, and I'm going to share a really interesting Stanford study with you in a bit about how the perceptions we have compared to the realities when it comes to social support. I hear a lot of negativity nowadays in the United States that's originating out of this political divisiveness that's happening. The good news that I will share with you, quite often, in fact almost in every case, our perceptions are much more negative than the reality. The reality is not as bad as we're perceiving it. And we're finding that with empathy, with kindness, with benevolence, people's willingness to help other people. In fact, the World Happiness Report came out, and I align this also, if you're familiar with Lloyd's Foundation, they look at risk and how resilient communities are. One thing that seemed really unusual when it came to the United States is they said that we score extremely high on resilience individually, as individual people. Our country scores low. That almost never happens. Usually those two are aligned. That can actually be good news for us. I mean, as researchers, we definitely want to go, why is that happening? Because that means there's a huge disconnect happening between what the individuals are feeling versus what a lot of our civic structures have in place. But it's good news because usually what drives the resilience at that town or societal level is the individuals. So it's better than having it in the flip case or the opposite scenario. And then of course, increased opportunities for meaningful activities as well. So let's get into the formula and then I'll plug in some recent studies and how it fits into this. So I mentioned GAP is an acronym. I came up with the title Mind the Gap when I was spending some time over in London. I used to run study abroads every summer over in London or in England and Scotland. Spent a lot of time in London. And with every train, with every tube visit, of course you hear the loop, mind the gap, where they're referring to the gap that occurs between the platform and the train, okay, or the tube. Because you can have serious injury if you fall in that gap. Well, I was sitting on it was actually the London Tube, and I was sitting there thinking, it's like, the same thing's true with communities. When I look at all of these variables that are impacting happiness, the different trends that we're seeing, a lot of it seems to circle back around to community connections, or lack thereof, the gaps between the individual and their communities. And that's really where this Mind the Gap came from. GAP is looking in particular at three areas. Grit is what the G stands for, action, the A, and P is place. So grit, we'll talk a little bit more about the difference here between resilience and grit. We use the term resilience a lot. Grit's a little different. You may be familiar with Angela Duckworth. She's made this term grit very popular. She didn't come up with it. Sometimes she gets credit with coining the term. It was a term that's been around way before her, but she popularized it in a TED Talk. But it's kind of resilience plus a bunch of other things. Grit is more long-lasting. Grit is part of your being. and how you move through the world. Some people are born with it. You might look at a 2-year-old that just digs their heels in, and it doesn't matter how much you push back, they're going to keep pushing back. They've got natural grit, and hopefully we can guide that to a positive way, but there's natural grit there. The good news, though, for all of us, we can learn it. So if we're not naturally born with it, you can learn grit. But what it takes is falling down and scraping our knees. Like, it takes us having to face challenges. Otherwise, there's no way to develop grit, which is where we're seeing some challenges nowadays with our youth. If we overprotect them, they don't have a chance to build this. But what grit really is a passion and sustained persistence, so over time, applied toward long-term achievements with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. Now, what Angela Duckworth means when she says no rewards along the way, she doesn't mean that there isn't going to be rewards. There will. And what we know from any sort of pursuit of goals, if you have a long-term goal and there's no reward along the way, it's very unlikely you're going to continue down that path. But what she means here is the person with grit is not continuing or persisting because of the reward. So it's not a conditioned response. It's not a carrot at the end of the stick. It's not something that's trying to pull me in. I'm doing it because it's part of my character. It's part of who I am. And I tend to get the rewards as well, but they're byproducts. Okay? It combines resilience, ambition, and self-control in the pursuit of goals that take months, years, or even decades. Some even a lifetime. You know, the eudaimonic happiness, I would argue, is a lifetime goal, because it's going to take you your whole life to really live full and flourishing. So in the book, and a little bit of this is blocked, but what I did is I took the most common trends that we were seeing out of the research and fit it into this acronym. So when we look at grit, these are all areas that the researchers have studied pretty consistently. Accountability impacts happiness. Achieving goals, we've already talked about quite a bit. Growth mindset. So the opposite of that is fixed mindset. I'm either smart or I'm dumb. I'm good at math or I'm bad at math. That's a fixed mindset. We define failure as a negative thing, rather than just a step towards whatever the goal is. Edison kind of had it figured out, right? I just tried to invent, and you can plug in just about any one of his inventions here, 100 different times incorrectly, but then the 101st time it worked. Okay, so thinking of failure as just the next step, it's process of elimination. I know that's not going to work. So growth mindset, we think of always being able to grow and learn. Positive attitude, reframing negative thoughts, negative self-talk, especially amongst youth, but we find it with all age demographics. We are, in many cases, much more brutal ourselves than anyone else has ever been or could be. Remember, you know yourself better than anyone else. So you know just how to get that zinger in there. And if we get in a cycle of negative self-talk, it has both physical and mental negative results. Responsible risk-taking, in comparison or contrast to reckless risk-taking. So not all risk-taking is good, but we have to take some risks if we're going to discover new things that will bring us happiness. So responsible risk-taking. Gratitude, compassion, and resilience. We won't have time, obviously, to go through all of these. Action, so not just thinking and talking about these trends, but actually putting them into our lives, into action. We talked about money already. Time with friends, happy people, civic engagement, avoiding unhealthy stress. There is a healthy stress that motivates us, so not all stress is bad, but you know when it hits that bad side, it starts impacting you negatively. Meditation and mental health, healthy eating, physical exercise, creativity, smiling and laughing a lot. We can actually trick our brain short term. I don't recommend this, but there have been a couple studies that have looked at what happens in our actual brain when we smile and we're not happy, but we convince ourselves we are. The fake it till you make it. What they find is it actually has these little pings that raises your happiness level a bit. Now, the reason I don't recommend it is, to me, that's wearing a mask. And if you do that long term, the psychology discipline has shown us that has devastating impacts in the long term. It's much better to deal with what we're feeling. So if we're feeling unhappy, to deal with those feelings than to try to mask it and put that smile on. You might get a little ping initially, but you'll pay for it tenfold down the road. And then authenticity, again, that plays into what I was just talking about. Place. I was sharing this with a couple folks before the talk. My last sabbatical, I focused on place. And it was right before COVID hit and we went into quarantine. So it was in 2019, that fall semester. My youngest child, my older three were all in college. My youngest was in 8th grade. And so I packed him up and we headed across country, and for 5 months we visited all 50 states, exploring how people have converted spaces to meaningful places. I mean, fantastic trip. We went to different kinds of natural reserves, animal preserves. I mean, it's amazing what the sanctuaries people have created in the United States. We looked at a lot of not just looked at, we lived in train cars and corn bins that have been converted, and just about anything you can think of that someone had an idea and created. Someone had done he was a retired engineer, created a whole scenario out of Lord of the Rings. He had the Hobbit house and the Buckleberry Ferry and the entire grounds. What we learned, I was interviewing for a new TV show for Penny Baker at the time. What we learned during that trip was that there were some commonalities when it came to place. And what became very obvious to me, place is not a backdrop. Okay? Place, not only is place impacted by your experiences and how you use that place, but place is impacting your experiences as well. And we found very different places created, so meaningful spaces in different regions of the country. And a lot of that had to do with this interplay between experience and place. So some of the variables that I've identified in the book under this area is being present, so in the moment, connected to community, happy places, nature, weather and climate, and mindful engagement with technology. So these are all, every one of these things I just rattled through, I could do an entire hour to 2 hour talk on, if not longer. So they're all major areas within happiness. I'm going to put this one up here because this is something that always seems to surface in the questioning part when we talk about what determines happiness. Sonia Lemurski is a researcher, happiness researcher from University of California. And she identified 3 determinants for happiness. I think she got it right when she identified the 3 determinants. I think her percentages are way off. What she came up, in fact, she got a lot of pushback when she published this. I was one of them that wrote to her and said, where'd you get these numbers from? And she has since pulled the numbers. And she's like, just focus on the 3 areas. And I do think she identified some the impactors in genetics. We're not all starting the race at the same point. Okay, so some of us have a natural propensity towards being happy. Others, not so much. I hesitate to use the terms optimistic and pessimistic because we tend to view pessimism as if it's negative. This isn't negative. When we're talking about genetics, it's just where you're starting the race. I always use the example very affectionately of my 2 middle children. My second child is what I would affectionately, when he was a kid anyway, refer to as an Eeyore. He could win the lottery and see the tax consequences. I mean, before the check was cashed. My daughter was less than a year younger than him, Tigger, bouncing off the walls. She could be in a burning building and talk about how cozy warm it is. Always saw the positive side. Now, one's not positive, one's not negative. It just is. That's how they see the world. They need each other, right? My daughter needs my son to pull her out of the building and go, yeah, there's also another way to look at this. You're gonna burn up, let's go. And my son needed my daughter to say, lighten up. You know, it's like you're missing an opportunity for that happiness as a feeling in the moment, that pleasure. Today, those predispositions haven't determined their happiness. They're both happy. But I can still see the predispositions. My son became a cybersecurity officer. He sees what could go wrong with the technology. He sees it before the technology is even fully out, right? My daughter is up there flying planes, and now she wants to fly over wildfires and put out the fires. Yeah, that's the Tigger in the burning building. It came a little too close to my analogy in the burning building, but she's happy and loves it. You know, so the predispositions are just part of who we are. When it comes to our happiness, external circumstances, what happens to us, and our actions and thoughts, that internal mindset, have a huge impact on our genetics. The actions and thoughts, much larger impact. I wouldn't hang on to this 40%. I don't think the percentages are on. I think it depends on how much work you do on yourself. We can actually get this way over into the majority if we're very intentionally living our lives. If we're very passive, use the example of someone who's on a social media website and is just scrolling, okay? That's very passive. Or I'm on the same social media website, but I'm very intentional about, okay, I want to talk to this person today, and I think they have a birthday coming up. Let me talk to this one. That's a very different usage of the same technology. External events, again, remember the early Greeks thought this drove everything. It actually, we find, has, in most cases, the smallest impact. And the study that made us aware of this was back in the 70s, 1978. They took a group of lottery winners, which today we understand winning a lottery is much more complex than what they understood in the 70s. But they took a group of lottery winners and aligned them with a group of people that were in horrific accidents. That were ending up being paralyzed, quadriplegics. So most of them were car accidents. What they expected was lottery winners are going to have a spike in happiness. They're going to be happier. People who are now quadriplegic, they're going to be unhappy, miserable. And initially, that is what happened. That's what they saw. Again, think of that in the moment, the fender bender. But the really interesting part of that study was that 6 months after whatever the external event was, all of the participants returned to their pre-state before the event occurred. In other words, it showed how resilient really we are as human beings, how we evolve and change with what happens to us. And what that means is, the more intentional we are, if we just sit back and go, oh, woe is me, this bad thing happened to me, it's gonna have a longer term and a more intense impact on me and my happiness. But if I actually take control of it and I say, okay, this thing happened, I didn't have control over it, here's what I'm gonna do about it, within the realm of things I have control over, it tends to have a very small impact in the long term. So the people who were winning the lottery, again, they were back to, if they were Eeyores before, talk about tax consequences, or they lost a lot of their, not just the fortune they won, but things they had before, lost friendships, lost family relationships. With the ones who were quadriplegics but were takers before, they ended up being the ones that were organizing special Olympic type events and fundraisers, and they were back to, if you surveyed them, they were back to reporting high levels of happiness. Again, that matched what they had before their event. So that was the fascinating part of that particular study. And all three of these areas, if you take it back to GAP, hit in that, all three areas in GAP. So genetics, when you think about grit, like I mentioned, some naturally have it, others have to learn it. When it comes to actions, we can learn it, we can practice it, develop it. And what happens to us matters, because if I just have this really kind of sheltered, pleasant life that nothing bad ever happens, I really can't develop grit, okay, because I have to be challenged to develop it. And I could do the same thing with actions and with place. All three of them are impacted by these three variables. All right, so not sure how we're doing on time here, but let's wrap this up with a look at some of the most recent research. Now, much of what I'm pulling today is coming out of the World Happiness Report. They just released the 2025 a couple months ago, which is actually studying 2024, so it's the previous year. And the World Database of Happiness is a global database where, regardless of what discipline people are coming from, they kind of dump all of their research. A lot of it's raw data. But if you're like a data person, you like to go to the source and look at the source of these, that's where I would direct you, is look at the World Database of Happiness. And then I included the Happiness Research Institute because they tend to put out a report as well that has some interesting focal points to it. And Martin Seligman is really the gentleman that's credited with founding positive psychology. And as I mentioned, a lot of the research I've been talking about comes out of that positive psychology area. So what challenges are we seeing? And what I want to kind of focus on today, social isolation in modern times, loneliness is at an all-time high, especially amongst the youth. Okay? Barriers to community participation, and this is where, for me personally, this is my core interest, is how the community impacts our happiness. So time constraints, perceptions of helplessness, problems are so big, climate change, political stuff, it's just out of my hands, I can't do anything about it. And we're hearing again a lot of that talk out of our youth, and when I refer to youth, much of the studies, the findings I'm going to share with you, when they say youth, they're referring to probably a little older than you might initially think. It's 18-year-olds to 29. It's those years when a lot of life changes happen. Okay, that's what they're calling youth here in the research. And then, of course, the impact of digital technologies. Solutions. Encouraging inclusive community practices. There's a lot of stuff we can do, and some of it's a pretty light lift. You know, it's not full happiness, town-wide happiness quest. It can be as simple as creating posters and hanging on the wall that shares it. We do find the more we think about the happiness research in that, it raises people's levels of happiness. And then leveraging technology in positive ways rather than negative ways. All right, so I promised you we'd talk about comparing countries. What's the happiest country?
Denmark.
Oh, I heard it, a couple here.
Denmark.
Finland. Norway's up there. Sorry, should be using this. Norway's up there in the top 5. Denmark is second. Denmark held it for years before Finland, but Finland's had it for years now. Finland had it before and after COVID, which is an interesting thing, because it just maintained. Show you a few, and this will probably be too small for you to see, but I want to at least give you an idea. They look at 147 countries. So these are the happiest countries. So you've got Finland #1, then Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, Netherlands. Those tend to occupy the top 5. And when you start looking at these in groups, they may have a little movement, but you don't find someone in position 2 is going to suddenly be in position 99. They don't have big leaps in changes. Unless there's something notable that you can, like if they go to war, we can see that kind of change. Couple quick points here. They're using surveys to draw a lot of these conclusions. So they're asking people how happy they are. There's some problems wrapped up with that. There's also problems in the surveys themselves. I'm always hesitant when I think about this comparing, not just countries, but even comparing people. I think it can be very problematic because you may not be reading that question the same as the person sitting next to you. So you're not answering the same question. On top of that, we know there are cultural impacts to these surveys. For example, if I give you a survey that says, okay, if you agree with this statement, mark a 1. If you strongly disagree with it, mark a 5. And then I have these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And of course, you've got some room in between. In the United States, you'll find a lot of 1s and 5s. We go to the extremes when we fill out surveys. If you go to a lot of your Asian countries, they won't touch the extremes. They'll go to 2s and 4s. Their 2 means are 1. But that's not how it shows up in the research. We just add those numbers up. So just have that in the back of your mind. That's why I say, think of these more as trends, and there's interesting stuff to tease out, but I don't necessarily take it at face value when they say these things. It's always interesting that they don't usually report out the unhappiest countries, but those tend to not change a lot either. And in the 2024 surveys, Afghanistan came in last. It just cuts off up here, but a lot of people asking about Ukraine, they came in at 111. And again, Ukraine used to be much higher than that. What we find when it comes to basic needs being met, we tend to think of Maslow's pyramid, food, shelter, water. When it comes to happiness, security and safety is #1, more important than food and water. So that's why you'll find on these, it's usually countries where they don't feel safe. That's why they're ranking low. These I included just to draw your attention. If you have an interest in these comparisons between countries, definitely just go online and put in World Happiness Report. You probably want to pull the 2025. But there's all kinds of interactive maps, and they give some interesting snapshots. This one I included, the darker the color, the greater the change. But these are changes that occurred from 2023 to 2024. Anything in orange or peach, and it didn't all carry over here, I have to apologize. These white ones over here were all peach, but they're a darker color. Those were countries where happiness went down in the last, from the 2023 to the 2024. Purple is where happiness went up. And you're not getting the full impact of it here, but anything that's white over here is actually a dark peach. Anything that's white over here is actually a light purple. Those are the colors that don't seem like they came through. We've never seen this kind of a divide when we look at a global map. So there's something interesting there happening. And it doesn't align with our perceptions necessarily of all these countries. Now, it could be that they're not honestly filling out the surveys. That could be a factor. It could be that we have the wrong perception of how happy people are. There's also, on this same website, you can put in individual countries out of the 147. The yellow line here, the one that kind of goes down a little bit, that's the United States. Now, this isn't comparing how happy, it's showing changes, from year to year. Did you go up a point, half a point? Did you go down? So it's showing changes. And you can see on this one, we're starting around 2012 up to the current. And I just put a few in here, again, always the lowest and the highest. So you've got, here's Afghanistan in black. Finland is in the orange one. The one that's in light blue, which I always find interesting, is China. China's actually been on a bit of a increase, pretty steep increase in their happiness levels. Little dip this last year. Okay, but other than that, I tend to hear out of my students a lot about, China, in fact, that's one of them they'll name when I say what are the unhappiest countries. China's actually not doing too bad as far as increasing. Doesn't mean they're scoring high when you look at all 147. But it's getting better there, is what we're looking at, the trends. If you're someone who fills out the Gallup World Poll, you're contributing to the data that I'm sharing. The questions in the last month, did you give money to a charity? Did you volunteer? Did you help a stranger? That's where they're pulling some of this data from. And there's some really interesting stuff around caring and sharing. So when we think about helping others, drop wallet exercises have been kind of a pretty long term. It started with Reader's Digest was the first one that did one of these studies, but if you dropped your wallet, do you think it would get returned?
Yes.
Let me see a show of hands. How many think that the wallet will get returned?
Depends where you are.
Okay, I got about half going, doesn't matter. Yes, it will. Does it depend where you are?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay? If it's dropped in Plymouth, will it get returned?
Yes.
Yes.
If it's dropped in New York City, will it get returned?
Maybe.
Okay, so here's some of the interesting things they found. Reader's Digest did a pretty small study, comparatively speaking, because they dropped 12 wallets in 16 countries, but they only did one city in each country. So they dropped 12 wallets in one city in the United States. Then they went to their next country, 12 wallets in one city. And then they compared their findings. And of the 192 wallets dropped, 90, so 46%, 90 wallets were returned. People interviewed believed 19% would be returned. Okay, so perception way off from the actuality. They couldn't identify a significant predictor for the return. It wasn't like a certain age group or a certain gender or a certain socioeconomic level. And they redid the study about 5 or 6 years later and had similar results with it. Following on that study, though, we get the what we tend to refer to as the Cone study, where they did a very extensive wallet drop. They went to 40 countries, dropped about 17,200 some wallets, so over 17,000 wallets, and they divided into 3 categories. Some of the wallets had no money in them at all, okay? And in my list here, the yellow line's the United States. So the ones with no money at all were considered just no money wallets, and then they had money wallets that they put the equivalent of $13.45. So again, depending on what currency, it would be the equivalent in US dollars of $13.45. And then big money was the equivalent of $94.15. And again, they asked people, do you think these wallets will be returned? And compared to who actually returned them. So in these wallets, They dropped them at both public and private institutions, so it wasn't all just public or all private, it was very extensive. And they had in the wallets the name, contact, like a number, that you could get in touch with someone. Obviously, some had money, some didn't have money. They had photos in there, like some family photos. And what they found is, in the United States, 62% of the wallets with big money were returned. 40% with no money were returned. And in between, it was like 56 or 57%, I want to say, of the ones with the smaller amount of money were returned. When they end up asking people, though, it was a much lower percentage of what they thought would be returned. So more people were returning. The most interesting thing out of this is the more the money, the more likely it got returned. And a lot of people felt that if you had more money in there, it's less likely they would return, or they'd return it without the money. And that didn't happen here. Lloyd's Foundation does this risk stuff. I mentioned them a little earlier, but they look at risk factors. And so they were interested in this drop wallet study. And so they came back and asked, what's your perception? Do you think people, like I just did with you, do you think they'd return it? People were asked if they thought other people would return their lost wallet if found by a neighbor, which is how my Plymouth question feels like neighbors, right? If found by a police officer. There they were looking at really how people are perceiving their civic organizations and their police forces and things like that. It tells us something different than just a dropped wallet. Or by a stranger, which is really what our previous study was about. Dropping a wallet, and it was just a stranger. Would a stranger return it? When wallets were dropped in the street by researchers, the proportion of returned wallets by strangers was far higher than people expected. And again, they went back and looked at this Cone study. And what they found is that it could be at times anywhere from 30 to 40% lower in our perceptions of how likely it is someone would return it. To give you something a little closer home here, they'll probably lock this in. This isn't a United States problem. This is a global issue. We tend to perceive people as being less empathetic, less kind than what they actually are. And that's a global thing. And here's the example I would use. I pulled a survey from Canada. Because I can't tell you the number of times I hear people say, I want to move to Canada. Canada's so much nicer. The people are nicer there than they are here. Well, they asked United States folks, if a wallet's lost in Canada, do you think that wallet will be returned? They're like, oh yeah, we scored pretty high. Our perceptions were up like in the low 70%. They asked the Canadians, if a fellow Canadian drops a wallet, do you think they'll return it? Nope. Everybody came back, 23% said that, well, 23% will return it. In reality, in actuality, 80% returned the wallet when they did the study. So we were actually more accurate in our perception than what they were of their own.
I hate to interrupt your flow, but this is a story about wallets. I saw this on YouTube. A woman, with a CEO of his company, was interviewing 4 people for a job, and in order to get to the office, they had to come to the elevator or something. So she had a person that worked for her drop a wad of money behind him, and the guy picks it up and he said, "Oh, did you drop your money?" She said, "Oh yeah, must have fell out of my purse." And then the 3 of them said, "Oh yes, that's mine. I don't know why. I pulled my pocket, whatever." So 3 of them claimed it. The 4th one said, "No, this isn't my money. Give it back to, you might find someplace else." So they all went up to the office to be interviewed, and the CEO, she was an Indian woman, she said, "Well, I've already interviewed you. We needed an honest person. We needed an honest person," and they said, "And this is the only one that gave them money."
Yeah, so it's an implied interview at that point. So, it is fascinating when we think about our perceptions of other people versus the reality of what happens. I find, and again, it's a bit of a mixed bag on our campus, because at times, like, our freshmen will come in almost overestimating. In some of my classes, we've run studies where they'll look at, like, will someone help you? If you drop, like, say, all your books and that, will they help you pick them up? Helpful studies like that. And what we find, it really matters how busy people are. That if they're on the way to class, or they're going to be late, or it's an important day, they've got an exam, less likely to help, than if they're just strolling, and they have time. So there, again, I don't want to oversimplify it. There's a lot of complex factors involved. So what we are finding in general, we tend to have lower perceptions than what the reality is. But the good news is by raising our perceptions, we can increase our levels of happiness. So that's easier to do quite often than changing people's behavior. It feels like much of the behavior is where it needs to be. And we're finding when a society is more benevolent, kind, helpful to each other, that the people who benefit the most are the ones who are least happy. They have the greatest increase. So quite often, we don't see a whole lot of shifts in the countries that already have a lot of kindness built right into their daily routine because they're already at a happier level than what a lot of these other countries have more of a divisiveness where some may be really happy, you got really unhappy people. It's pretty easy to pull the unhappiness up at that community level. This I just wanted to get on everyone's radar. I know the COVID pandemic was not a fun thing. Going into quarantine and all that was not a fun thing. But there is a positive side to it for happiness. The reality is when we go through periods of trauma, we do tend to be more helpful and kind to each other. And we saw that in the research, it spiked. And although we have a bit of a diminishing return, but since 2020, each year it's going down a little bit, but we're still, in 2024, we're still ranking higher in our willingness to help each other than we were before COVID. So it does kind of have a little bit of that positive residual impact. And I know we're, in the interest of time here, I'm going to go through these a little quickly, but I do want to note, it matters how we help. So it's not just helping, the when and the how matter. They tend to refer to this as the 3 C's, but it has to be a caring connection, something that I'm intentionally doing. The more forced it is, where it's not my choice, the less impact, if any impact it's going to have. In fact, it could even have a negative impact. So a lot of this where there's even some companies now that are like forcing charitable donations, I think that doesn't work when it comes to people's happiness. It's got to be my choice. And the more I can see the positive impact of whatever it is, if I'm donating money or if I'm donating time or expertise, if I can see that impact, the greater the impact spike is in my happiness. Again, that seems a little commonsensical. Again, I like to see that positive outcome. So, how can we do this in small ways? One, to the extent possible, try not to dine alone. Okay, we're finding eating alone is contributing to the increased amount of loneliness and depression that we're seeing globally, not just the United States. Some interesting figures here. The number of people who are dining alone. Here's in the United States. In 2023, roughly 1 in 4 Americans reported eating all of their meals alone the previous day. This is an increase. It's been a steady increase since 2003. If I compare it, 53% more people now are dining alone all day long. Okay? We did some of you may even have participated in the Sheriff Fair that was held, we had a couple of years of this, 2015, 2016. This was in Plymouth again, it was over at Plymouth Elementary School, and some of you will see yourselves in that picture, that what we did is we organized the nonprofits, and it was really larger than just Plymouth, it was kind of central New Hampshire, because we found we were competing for the same grants, and we were all kind of small organizations, so we weren't getting them as we were going up against some of these other areas that were larger. And so we decided, well, what if we just all come together and share our resources, rather than going outside trying to find external money. And so they organized in the gymnasium area of the elementary school, kind of these 4 quadrants, and everybody set up a table showing what they have to offer and expressing what their needs were. And then everybody kind of did a bartering system, started collaborating and partnering up. But the reason I share this with you is we started this event with a potluck dinner. Everybody brought a dish in their cafeteria, we all sat down and had a meal together, everyone, filled the room. Then we went and did our little mini conference. That was the most impactful. When we did surveys, everybody talked about potluck. You know, more so than what even the actual conference itself was intended to do. So trends towards increased loneliness, I've mentioned this, it's impacting our youth the heaviest. And we dropped a little in the country comparison report this year, and it was because of our youth. They were the ones that were reporting lower levels of happiness. And we're finding that in 2023, 19% of young adults, this is around the world, so yes, not just a United States thing, 19% of young adults reported having no one they could count on for social support. So these are the severely lonely youth. This is a 39% increase compared to 2006. So Stanford University decided to take this on. Say, is there something we can do about it? Because what they were concerned about is if people perceive others, even if they're incorrect, if they perceive others as not being willing to help them, so lacking empathy, it has this vicious cycle. If I don't think you're going to empathize with me, I'm going to be very reluctant to reach out and connect with you. So I'm not going to make new friends. I'm not going to share my problems with you. As soon as I start socially avoiding any sort of social risk, I start to feel isolated because I am isolating myself, social isolation. That leads to mental health issues. You know, and then when I'm feeling depressed, I certainly don't feel like reaching out. And now my perception gets deeper, that rut in my brain going, yep, no one's going to help me. Look, I'm all alone. And really, I've caused this cycle to happen. So what Stanford did, very simple, it created a series of posters for their campus, sharing the actuality of their studies. 95% of Stanford students are likely to help others who are feeling down. And they would just put these in their elevators, in their bathrooms, on their walls. 86% of Stanford students try to improve how others feel by offering helpful advice. In other words, they care. Your fellow student cares. 85% of Stanford students enjoy meeting and becoming friends with students they don't know. Reach out, introduce yourself. So these are really simple things. We can do that off of a college campus on a broader level, equally as well. Just getting the actual data out there as how helpful people really are. Okay, so to pull this all together, I don't want to end it on a negative point, but the reality is you can't study happiness without studying unhappiness. I was instrumental in creating a pamphlet on youth suicide for our state representatives a few years back. The opposite of happiness is despair. And these are the folks that need this happiness research more than everything, you know, because of the state, the mental state they're in. So deaths of despair, they're decreasing in most countries. They're increasing in the United States and in the Republic of Korea. I don't know why it's the two of us, but it's something for the United States to look at because we have the resources within our community, our social resources to turn this around. So deaths of despair are significantly lower in countries when the people report donating, volunteering, and helping strangers. So the community connection. Where we donate matters. So not just tossing our money around, but thinking about the cause. We find donations to like mental health groups or substance misuse groups, things like that, tend to have a longer term in the increased happiness because you feel like you're making a bigger difference for long term. Than maybe if I'm just donating to, I don't know, somebody's trying to raise money. I can't even come up with a good example because most of ours up here have legitimate reasons behind it. Maybe it's just my personal, I'd like a better boat. So I put something up there and say, hey, donate so I can get a better boat. And I don't really have a reason to have this boat outside of my own entertainment. That's different than, let's say you create a fund account to raise money because you know someone that maybe lost someone in the recent floods in Texas, or you know the hurricanes and the other natural disasters we're seeing move through the Midwest. Those have a longer return in increased happiness. And contributing in meaningful ways, you know, that's going back to that money. I'm gonna end it with what I started talking about money. Experience is what's really most important. So it does increase happiness when we make charitable donations, and I don't wanna knock that, but when we're actually participating in ways that are meaningful to us, showing up, making the difference, that tends to have the larger return. And I'll just share real quick, this picture is of a horse named Roman. I'm on the board of directors, in full disclosure here, for Free Rein Rescue and Rewards. But they're an organization out of Bethlehem that rescues horses from the slaughter pipelines that feed into Canada and Mexico. They always accept donations. I can donate money. I don't. Instead, I donated time. I got on the board and I show up for events and work with some of the animals. So there's different ways you can participate. And what we find, these experiences again tend to have the greater turnaround, the reward when it comes to happiness. And that, got sources there, that is the end of it for today. Now again, a lot more to talk about, but I know we're over time. I'm happy to answer questions. I will stay as long as you want. And there's lots of other things we can talk about. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm easy to find at the university. Just look for philosophy, because I'm the one that coordinates the program. And you can find me.
Dr. Sanders has given us a wealth of information and ideas, and we have time for one or two questions if anybody wants to ask them. I'll just ask you to use the microphone so that it goes across the live stream.
So some years ago, Dar Williams, the singer, songwriter, wrote about what she thought made happy communities, and she mentioned places where people could congregate. So for instance, dog parks or the coffee shop. And you talked a lot about individual. So my question is, places like Finland, is the reason they're happier because they have more places to congregate, or is it studying more about individuals? And then follow up, Plymouth is known to be a pretty happy place, and we've heard that from friends that have moved away and said, oh my God, there's no better place than this community. So if a whole lot of Eeyores move into Plymouth, will that bring us down, or will our happy community bring them up?
So those are both very interesting questions. I'm going to start with the second one first. It really has to do with how resilient the community itself is. And so it could go either way. We find, because we do have, and I think you're going to see this for easily the next 5 to 10 years, people are going to be moving around quite a bit because of climate change. They're looking for different regions, and where they called home isn't necessarily home anymore, and some are actually losing their homes. That can drastically change a community, for better or worse, when we talk about happiness. But it will definitely change it because you're changing the components. A community is the compilation of its members, its individuals. So what I recommend in those scenarios is be intentional. As a community, the things that you really value in Plymouth, don't let go of them. And when people come in or they want to change or push back, you got to show up and say, here's why we value this. There was a series, and I'll share this with you because, again, New Hampshire Hu-manities is sponsoring today's talk. They just sponsored a series of talks in 6 different towns. One of them was Holderness, that's where I facilitated, on community conversations, talking about what it means to be a community center, what does it mean to actually be a community, what constitutes a community. And as things are changing, because Holderness experiences this, where individuals will move in, they're not looking at the local culture, they're wanting to bring their culture. And how do you handle with that clash that often happens? And what I always say, you've got to be a voice at the table. You got to show up and in very respectful ways share. Because again, if for over 2,000 years, almost 3,000 now, they've been talking about happiness. The one thing philosophers tend to agree on, people want to be happy. We don't agree on much when it comes to philosophy. We question everything, but we don't question that. It seems very consistent that if I'm moving to your town, something attracted me to your town. So if I'm coming in now and completely changing that in a negative way, I'm not doing that intentionally. It's probably, in my mind, I'm seeing that or viewing that very differently than how it's being viewed when they come in. So I just say, have those open and honest and in a respectful way conversations, because you build the community you're in, and it can change. You don't want to take it for granted. First question. It's my senior moment now. What was your first question? Oh, Finland. Yes.
Rather than individual happiness, is that places to congregate? Does that play in?
Yeah, we are just starting to study why Finland keeps coming out at the top. It's just been really the last few years. In fact, Finland offered in 2020, they had I don't know what to call it, it was kind of like a applied project where they were inviting someone from another country. If I wasn't on my sabbatical at the time, I would have applied, to come and live in Finland for a year. And because they're even curious why they're scoring so high. And if you talk to a lot of the local residents, they're not convinced that it's the happiest place. So they're like, well, what does this mean? A few of the things that I've seen is it does seem like at the national level, they have some things in place that are alleviating the safety and security concerns that other countries are suffering. And some of that is health related, medical. Some of it is the spaces that you're referencing, that there's places to congregate. So they seem intentional at a national level of putting in place the things that are needed to make a lot of these trends a reality in their country. But again, there's a lot to be studied yet in Finland.
Thank you for this presentation. I really enjoyed it. Happiness seems to be an abstract, like beauty, what is beauty? I can't read it. Can you hear me now?
Got to hear you.
So we're talking about an abstract term here, and your presentation seemed to be Western oriented. And I'm wondering, have you done anything about, as far as thinking in the Eastern cultures, that would conflict with what we think of happiness as? Is there some differences there? Like people who live in monasteries, some of them don't make a vow not even to talk again. Everything, they seem to be happy. So are there degrees of happiness? And if so, are some people not capable of happiness? So is there any Eastern thought about that? Have you studied anything about the Eastern concepts of happiness?
Yeah, you're stepping outside of my realm of expertise. And what I would say first and foremost is yes, like I'm barely scratching a sliver of what we're looking at from a research standpoint when it comes to happiness. I'm a Western philosopher, so my entire background really comes out of the ancient Greeks, and that's why I mentioned Aristotle in that. I have a little bit of information on the Eastern side of things, but there are some, I would say, some notable differences when you think about Eastern. I even hesitate to refer to it as Eastern philosophy, but Eastern theories. Like when you think about like the Buddhists and that, suffering ends up being in the central play of when they talk about happiness, because suffering is the flip side of the coin, so to speak, and suffering is a very real thing. Taoism focuses a lot on balance, finding that balance. So if we talk about happiness as a feeling, they wouldn't even view that as a positive thing to feel like really elated. What you want is balance and maintain that balance. And so there's very different perspectives coming out of the East, just outside of my area of expertise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Time for one more?
So, am I on?
Yes.
So, the book that made an incredible difference to me when I was in my late 30s, early 40s, was Psychocybernetics. And it changed my concept of what I was, what was destined and what I had control over. And I just wondered, was it Viktor Frankl who talked about man searching meaning, and that was he the one that was stuck in a concentration camp and still made himself happy? So that whole, is that part of what you do?
It is, and there are several studies actually around the concept of free will that are rather interesting. And again, not surprising when we think about it after the fact, but if individuals feel they have free will and free choice, they tend to report higher levels of happiness than those that feel like everything's predetermined. Calvinism comes to mind, because in Calvinism it's predestination. From the moment you're born, everything's predetermined. They tend to, if you don't have choice, I'm out of control, it's back to the external world. Those external events have a bigger impact on me. I don't have the control. Okay? And so the more I feel like I can change things, the happier I am, because I feel like I have a role in this, like I'm an actual active player in the midst. Now again, and I want to be really careful here, I am not claiming all Calvinists are unhappy by any means. You know, that is not the case. I use that as an example of the extent to which I feel like I have free will and choice versus all this stuff's just happening to me and I'm either a victim or I happen to just be graciously at the receipt of stuff I have no control over. That's the difference.
Great, well, thank you so much, Dr. Sanders. Thank you all for coming today. I also want to thank New Hampshire Humanities for sponsoring this program, and just remind you that there are evaluation forms that were handed as you came in, also at the end of each row, and you can just fill those out. Please join us here next week for our Sunday service, which will be a discussion of the New Hampshire Music Festival, presented by its new executive director, Erin Brooker Miller. We hope to see you there, and if you'd like to see our entire summer schedule, please go to our website www.starkingfellowship.org. And now we will extinguish our chalice, which is our usual custom at the end of our service. And our extinguishing the chalice words are by Deborah Burrell. We have basked in the warmth and beauty of this flame and this community. As the chalice flame is extinguished, let us carry its glow within. Let us kindle new sparks within these walls and beyond. So thank you again for coming, and hope to see you next week.